Had a good week so far. It's been a little crazy in our house, but hope yours has been more relaxing. We've got a lot to run through this week, but fortunately there's only 3 chapters next week, so if we don't make it all the way through, I think we'll have some free time next week. I do have a couple of public service announcements. My wife wrote on the first page, Ladies' Day Saturday. If you don't know that, then you've been hiding. Ladies' Day Saturday, still need some food items, Sarah says. Sign up if you plan to attend. So ladies, and then for the men, because I don't want you to feel left out, November 16th is the chili cook-off. There'll be 3 categories, chili to eat, chili for heat, and then chili for the meek. And I think Jamie has won the last 3 years in chili to eat. So come in that category if you feel like losing. Try the other categories if you want to win. So let's go ahead. We got lots to go through. I'm going to start tonight's outline. We're going to go back a little bit. We're going to look at Job's 3 friends, the Lament of Job in Job 3, because we didn't spend sufficient time on it last week, and it sets up the dialogue that Job is going to have with his 3 friends in this first cycle, or this first discourse. Then the beginning of the first discourse, we're going to look at Eliphaz, the first of the friends to speak, and then Job's response. So Job's 3 friends. They made an appointment together to come to show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him, and they raised their voices and wept. And they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. Now, we're going to spend several weeks of this quarter talking about how wrong Job's friends are. But here's a few things that they did right. If you look at it, for them, showing sympathy, showing comfort was a very intentional act. It said they made an appointment. And I know several people that one was a volunteer chaplain in North Carolina who spent days and days and days in the hospital taking care of those who were ill, those that needed a comforting word, those who needed empathy. And some people are just very intentional about giving comfort. You know, you look at, is it 2 Corinthians, where it talks about us being comforters because we ourselves have been comforted. You know, the world would be a lot better place if we all became intentional comforters. Then basically they did the traditional signs of grieving. They raised their voices, they wept, they tore their robes, they sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven. And then they sat in silence. Now, in the ancient Near East, it was the custom that if you went to comfort someone and they were suffering, you waited for them to speak first. You know, you didn't offer words of comfort. And sometimes we're like bulls in the china shop. We rush in with our words of comfort, and it may not be the right time for that person to listen to your words. Sometimes we just need to sit there and be silent and wait for them to start the conversation. But there's some things that they did right. We're going to spend a lot of time showing some things that they did wrong. So the first question I want to ask is, what is a lament? You know, we've got a book called Lamentations. What is a lament?
Intentional sympathy.
Okay.
Sorrow.
Okay. it's an intentional, maybe, demonstration of sorrow, of grief. What is a lament? Now, most of you have been in my classes before, and you know if I go on, it's not because somebody else's answer was wrong. I'm looking for other answers as well. What is a lament? All of us have suffered the death of a loved one. All of us have suffered the loss of a friend. And I would imagine that probably afterwards you lamented.
Well, a lament can be poetic, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay? It does not have to be. A lot of times it's a very physical demonstration. What Job's friends did, tearing their robes, putting ashes on their heads, crying out in anguish. Sometimes it's a very physical act. Lament can be.
And in that case, I think it developed as a society. This type of behavior developed into their society, and they continue.
Yeah. They were shocked?
They were shocked at what they saw.
Okay. So they were grieving. Kendall?
Expression of grief.
Okay, an expression of grief. Now, when I was very young, my great-grandmother was a Martin. And she was Irish. And when she passed away, and this was before the law said you had to take him to a funeral home, they had a wake. And I remember going in as a small child, and there were people that were, you hear the phrase weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. That's what they were doing. They were lamenting my great-grandmother Martin's passing. It was an Irish wake. They were lamenting. It could be sorrow, it could be regret, it could be loss. So let's take a look at the very beginning of Job's lament. And I'm just going to look at a few different phrases that all kind of lead up to one thing. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And Job said, "Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said, a man is conceived." And then we jump down to verse 7. "Behold, let that night be barren." He's talking about the night of his birth. "Let no joyful cry enter it." And then down to verse 10. "Because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb, nor hide trouble from my eyes." So it's very obvious from reading this that Job is cursing the day of his birth. He's basically saying, it'd be better off, the world would be a better place if I hadn't been born. So, why would he say that? He was struggling. He'd lost his wealth. He had lost his influence. In chapter 29, I think we're going to find out that he used to sit at the city gates. He was one of the men of wisdom. If somebody had a suit against somebody else, they would go to the city gates and they would let all the wise men, the older men, basically settle the dispute. So he's lost his influence. He's lost his children. He's suffering greatly. And for him, he's thinking, it'd be better off if I hadn't even been born. How do we usually look at our days of birth or our birthdays? Happy. We celebrate. Now, some people stop celebrating But for the most part, most people do continue to celebrate their birthdays. Some people get kind of stuck on 29 or 39 or 49. But, we generally celebrate them. It's a celebration of our existence. But Job wants this day to be forgotten. He's feeling right now that his existence is nothing to celebrate. And he feels that way because, right now things are dark. They've been darkened by grief. They've been darkened by pain. And he can't make any sense out of it. We're told at the very beginning that Job is upright, that he's blameless. We know that he's innocent. But by this time, he's suffered so much. Do you think maybe a little bit of doubt is starting to creep in? He's trying to make sense of it all. When did I sin? Why am I suffering? He's trying to figure it out.
We think about all the things that he lost and all the things that he may be grieving about, but just the fact that the things that they said to him and the pain that he's going through because they were saying, you must have done something wrong. You're a horrible person.
Yeah, but the thing is that Job believed that just as much as they did. He believed in the retribution principle. If you do well, if you're righteous, you'll be blessed. If you do wrong, if you sin, you'll be cursed. He believed it just as much as they did.
It's still painful.
Still painful.
Don't you think we, to a large degree, still believe?
Oh, I'm sure we do. And I know that there are things that I've done in my own life that exhibited that very same thing.
But I don't think he ever felt like he would ever be in that situation. He would be that way. He would be accused of that, I mean, he may have believed that,
Well, I think that when we get into his three friends and they're accusing him, I think that you're going to see that he maintains his innocence, his integrity throughout. And there was something that I was going to say, and now it slipped my mind. Slipped my head. Okay. The protest of why. So now we're going to see a different aspect of Job's suffering. And this is from chapter 3, and we're going to begin in verse 11. Why did I not die at birth, come out from the womb and expire? Why did the knees receive me, or why did the breast that I should nurse? For then I would have laid down and been quiet. I would have slept. Then I would have been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth, who rebuilt ruins for themselves, or with princes who had gold, who filled their houses with silver. Or why was I not as a hidden stillborn child, as infants who never see the light? There the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary are at rest. There the prisoners are at ease together. They hear not the voice of the taskmaster. What is Job talking about now? The dead. Okay. The small and the great are there, and the slave is free from his master. Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter in soul, who long for death, but it comes not, and dig for it more than for hidden treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they find the grave? So he's talking about the dead. Does Job at this point desire death? See a couple. Who? Somebody speak over here? Charlie? Okay. And you were about to say something? Okay, you're just shaking your head, yes?
Yes.
Okay. It sure looks like it from his lament that he's desiring death. Why?
He has no hope left.
Okay.
Can't figure it
What is, at this point, what is Job's, from what we can see in those last verses that I read, what is Job's view of the afterlife? Relief? Peace? No more burdens? What? Much better than what he was currently experiencing. The word that I'm thinking about is rest. He's looking for rest. For him, death is a place of rest. And if you read the list of all the people that he expects to be there, everyone's equal in death. The poor, the rich, the sinful, to him, everyone's equal. For Job, death will be a refuge from what has become an unbearable life. And I didn't. So now we're going to look at the end of Job's first lament.
You brought up a week or two ago about how we would deal with it. It wouldn't take all these things to bring me down, I know that. One of them.
We get cut off on News Circle, or we have an auto accident, and we're saying, "Why me?" We get upset about material things, and Job he's lost everything. Only his wife, who's acting as an ally to the accuser, the challenger, is left. Did everyone get a class outline? Okay. And there's a bibliography as well. If you didn't, I'll have them up here on the front pew. You can get them after class. And I will tell you that there's been one change. There'll be no class on December 29th. And what I thought I had 13 classes, I now have to do in 12 classes. So there'll be some days we'll really be moving on. Okay, the end of Job's first lament. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For my sighing comes instead of my bread, and my groanings are poured out like water. For the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. Remember when the challenger is talking to God in heaven? And God says basically, have you noticed my man Job? And the challenger or Satan comes back and says, well, you've hedged him in. Does Job worship God for nothing? Is the phrase that's used. You've hedged him in. He acts that way because you continue to bless him. He acts that way because you reward him each time he does. Sort of like, what is it, Pavlov's dog? Because he kept getting the food, he kept doing the things that they wanted him to do. And, so that's what Satan's accusation is. You've hedged him in. Now, that's a hedge of protection. What kind of hedge are we talking about here? We've seen one that's protective. So this one is what I would call restrictive. God has hedged him in. He has nowhere to turn for comfort, for relief. He's hedged in. It's like one of those big hedge mazes. Sometimes you get to the point where you can't go any further. You've hedged yourself in. Job at this point's feeling trapped. And I think he might even feel abandoned at this point. Then let's go down here where it says, for the thing that I fear comes upon me, and what I dread befalls me. What is the thing that Job fears and dreads? Kendall? Mm-hmm. Yeah. In a tunnel, can't go backwards, got to keep moving forward. Now, my wife will tell you that a Faulkner never goes backwards. If we're on a trip and I forgot something behind me, we'll get it there. A Faulkner never goes backwards, to my detriment at times. So what is the thing that Job fears and dreads?
Continuing to live in the situation.
Okay. Continuing to live in the situation that he's in, continuing to suffer. Continuing to live what he considers to be a meaningless existence.
Most of us cannot deal with grief, heartache for very long. We expect it to get better, and when it doesn't, after a while, it just gets really taking aim.
We can become cynical. And right now, I think we have more cynics out in our nation than I've ever seen before. Let's be different. Let's be the optimist. Then it says, I have no rest. And I also like, nor am I quiet, because that's one of the things that Eliphaz will jump on him about. I'm not at ease, nor am I quiet. And he'll continue to say things like that when he responds to Eliphaz. So I have no rest. Is Job again, is he making that allusion to his desire for death? Here's a quote that I came across. It's been a while since I've seen it, and I thought it was appropriate for this evening. And this is from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who, if you read the biography of Bonhoeffer, he almost makes it to the end of World War II. He's coming down to the final days. Germany is just about to surrender, and Hitler is basically bumping off all those that he feels are his worst enemies. And he names Bonhoeffer. And Bonhoeffer is killed in the closing days of World War II. So he was a theologian, well-known preacher, one who stood against Nazism in Germany when other people in the Lutheran Church would, because Hitler had made it a national religion, stood with Nazism. And he says, I fear Christians rush too quickly to the New Testament. They need to read the Psalms first. Why would Dietrich Bonhoeffer say that? And if you want to know what Bonhoeffer means, it means bean farmer. Comes from a family of bean farmers. Why would he say they need to read the Psalms first?
Because the Psalms are full of hope and comfort and trust in God. And there's so many different things there in Psalms.
Mm-hmm. But there's the full range of emotions in Psalms. There's not just comfort and hope and trust in God. There's Psalms of lamentation. Lament Psalms as well. And I think people need to learn to grieve, because sooner or later our lives are going to lead us to those moments where we'll need to grieve. And where better place are you going to learn to grieve than in the Bible? And I think he's saying what we need to learn about suffering and how to respond to suffering before we go to the New Testament and we see the one that suffered for us all. Now, the answer I wrote down this afternoon was, we need to learn to lament. Now, that doesn't mean you have to tear your robes and put ashes on your head, but we need to learn to lament. So now we finally get to Eliphaz. Yes, sir. I think it is. Life for him at that time was unbearable. You know, you've got these big scabs on your arms and your body, and you're taking a shard of pottery that you found on the garbage dump, and you're scraping them, just to find a little bit of comfort. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. To him, death was a refuge. It was a place of rest. Beginning in chapter 4. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, if one ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? Yet who can keep from speaking? Behold, you have instructed many, and you've strengthened the weak hands. Your words have upheld him who was stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. But now has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are dismayed. It's kind of reminds me of a younger person going to an older person, maybe a son going to a parent, says, you know, Dad, I got something to tell you, but will you lose your cool if I tell you? Oh, I got to tell you. And then he does. And, you know, if you look at what he says next, the only thing I could think of when I read the next 4 verses was, oh, how the mighty have fallen. You know, remember in 2 Samuel, I think it's in chapter 1, when David is lamenting the death of Saul and Jonathan, and he says, oh, how the mighty have fallen. Well, Job, one of the greatest men in the East, now he's sitting on a trash heap, surrounded by 3 of his supposed friends. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. So how is Eliphaz insulting Job here? Because it is an insult. Verses 3 through 5.
My first thought was how many people have looked at what he just went through, but probably no one all at once. So that
Yeah. So who can empathize with him? No one has experienced this kind of loss. So what's...
people in history that you just mentioned, they did something to put themselves in those situations where the mighty have fallen. And Job was not. So he was different about it.
Yeah, Saul's pride. So how is Eliphaz insulting Job in verses 3 through 5?
By making accusations.
Okay, an accusation, and I almost think that he's calling him a hypocrite. You used to counsel people like who are in the situation you're in now, people who were suffering because of their sin. You used to counsel them wisely. But now you won't even take your own wise counsel. Instead, you're impatient. Instead, you're dismayed. He's basically calling him a hypocrite because he won't heed his own wise counsel. Or at least from what Eliphaz can see, he won't heed his own counsel. And I'm sure that because Job believed in the retribution principle, when he counseled those people, he probably begged them to repent. Because he thought, if you repent, God will bless you. If you don't, he will curse you. Is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? Remember, who that was innocent ever perished? Or where were the upright cut off? As I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they are consumed. The retribution principle, I want to just say RP, but I don't think we're to that point yet where you would know what I'm talking about. The retribution principle rings throughout that. He said, Job, before you put your confidence in your fear of God, your respect for God, and the integrity, your blameless, upright behavior was your hope. And then he basically does a backhanded, now you know yourself, no one who was ever innocent perished. The upright aren't cut off. So he's taken the reverse of the retribution principle, saying, look, just look at the state you're in. You're a sinner. You're guilty. And if you want to just say two words that sum up what the three friends say with that throughout, you could just take your finger and say, you're guilty, you're guilty, you're guilty, you're guilty. I mean, 2 words sums it up. And I've got to teach 12 weeks on it, so. But that's basically throughout that. He is insulting Job. Those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same, the retribution principle. By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they are consumed. Those who sin will be cursed.
We think we know how other people feel. We jump to conclusions. We do those kind of things.
Yeah.
Many times we don't have any idea what someone is going through, how they feel, the emotions that they have, but we want to give them advice.
Yeah. And I find I have some classmates from high school that the only way I can describe it is they've lived a hard life. And I go back and look at our reunions, and they look like they're, instead of being 60, like they're 80 or 75. They look much older because they've lived a hard life. And in my mind, I'm not being empathetic. I'm thinking, they're getting what they deserved. And I need to change my thinking and be more sympathetic, more comforting, and try to empathize. It's a real easy trap to fall into.
We do reap what we sow.
Well, it says that in the New Testament. Yes, ma'am.
Don't you think we fall into teaching this same thing today, especially to our own children?
Yeah, and it's probably, and I think it's easier because when you're young, you see things black and white. Things are this or they're this. And as they grow older, then they can start to understand, well, there are shades of gray too. And there's many different ways that I can go out and glorify God. So, I can see that we are. I told my kids for years, if you do what's right, you'll be blessed. You do what's wrong, you'll be cursed. Now, I was talking about a different kind of curse, grounding or whatever. They lose their phones or they lose computer time.
When I read this, I think of human nature.
Oh, yeah.
And we are taught that from children, because if you misbehave, you're punished.
Mm-hmm.
Right word. Also, the Bible doesn't teach us differently, that things just happen. We're not the focal point of any particular action. But that's so ingrained into us, we start to think that way towards God.
Mm-hmm.
We've all been guilty of it some point.
Yeah. My brother-in-law calls it Santa Claus religion, where we give to God because we expect to receive from God, and that's what he calls it. It's ingrained in our self-talk. Something happens to us. Maybe it's an auto accident, and the self-talk is saying, "Why me? Why am I being punished this way?" And you might even be going through, well, what have I done today to deserve this? So we have it ingrained into our self-talk. And it's been put there from childhood. I think that's why we need to read Job, and we need to read those Psalms. Yes, sir.
I think we can find from Job that we don't suffer in proportion to the sins that we commit. But I'm curious of your direction about this retribution process. Are you indicating that it's not in existence?
No, it is in existence. And I think I made this point in the first class. What Satan was doing was saying the retribution principle was the only way that God dealt with man. And that's not true.
It is a process.
It is a process that God uses in dealing with man, but it's not the only one. So, and what we need to remember is in the ancient Near East, Job and his neighbors, everyone, they believed in the retribution principle, the RP. They all believed it. And I think we do here in 2021, we believe it as well to a certain extent. So it's a good thing we got next week and we only have 3 chapters, because we're not going to make it through. Okay. Now, I'm going to introduce the vision of Eliphaz. Have you ever had someone who was losing an argument to you, or maybe you were having a discussion about the Bible with them, and all of a sudden they decided to trump you and said, well, I was praying last night, and God told me to speak this to you, or told me to tell you this. Has anybody ever done that to you? They're kind of trying to take the high ground, trying to take your foundation out from under you. Anybody had that happen? I've had it happen to me. I've worked in 4 different churches, and it probably happened once every 2 months as a preacher. Somebody would say that to me. Well, God spoke a word to me for you. And I'm like, I pray to the same God. Why didn't he tell me? Well, Eliphaz is about to do that same thing to Job. Now, word was brought to me stealthily. My ear received the whisper of it. Amid thoughts from visions of the night, when deep sleep falls on men, a spirit glided past my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern its appearance. A form was before my eyes. There was silence when I heard a voice. Can mortal man be in the right before God? Can a man be pure before his Maker? Basically, what is Eliphaz saying? That this vision is told him to tell Job. One word. Repent. Repent. You need to be able to stand up before God. And now Eliphaz continues his insults. And this one, I think this is the one that I really thought was very low. It was like putting salt or alcohol on a fresh wound. You skin your knees and you went in and your mom would get out the bottle of alcohol and you go, oh no, it's going to hurt. Well, this is Eliphaz putting salt into a wound. Call now. Is there anyone who will answer you? To which of the holy ones will you turn? Surely vexation kills the fool, and jealousy slays the simple. I've seen the fool taking root, but suddenly I cursed his dwelling. His children, now when he's saying his here, and when he's talking about the fool, who is he implying? Is he just talking about any man? He's got Job in mind. He's calling Job a fool. His children are far from safety. They are crushed in the gate, and there is no one to deliver them. Now think about how Job felt toward his children. They would get together each day. They would have meals together. They liked being together. And Job, as the spiritual leader of his family, just in case someone may have sinned, may have cursed God during one of those gatherings, brought them out, consecrated them, and gave sacrifices for them. That's how much he cared about his children. He was trying to protect his children. And what does Eliphaz say here? And there is no one to deliver them. There is no one to protect them. Job is still grieving for the loss of his children. And Eliphaz is just pouring salt into the wound. You know, to me, you can't get much lower than that. He's saying your sins are responsible for their deaths. And that's the last. Okay, folks, we're going to read. Let me see if I can get there. I had like 30 slides, so I knew I wasn't going to make it through. Next week's class, Job 8 through 10. We're going to see where Bildad speaks. We're going to finish up Eliphaz, see where Bildad speaks and where Job replies. Thank you very much for your attendance. Have a good evening.